Hello and welcome to another interesting English language class. My name is Precious Balogun. Our theme for today is Oracy Skills Listening for Comprehension, and our topic is listening to lectures and taking notes. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to listen attentively to lectures, take adequate and meaningful notes from lectures, and lastly, identify main points from the lecture. Have you ever found yourself in a lecture hall or a classroom where you have to listen and take notes? Sometimes we find ourselves in this situation. It is important that we listen attentively so that we can take notes effectively. Now, there are two concepts we'll be looking at: listening and note-taking. What is listening? Listening is one of the language skills we must have as good English students. Now, listening is a mental process that involves the receiving of sounds with our ears and processing them into meaningful words, phrases, or sentences. Now, listening attentively will help us understand what is being said and also help us write clear notes. Going on, what is a lecture? A lecture is an oral presentation made by a speaker to an audience or a group of people. Here, the speaker informs and teaches the audience about a particular topic or subject. Some typical examples of a lecture are a presentation by a class teacher, a university lecturer, a sermon, a political speech, a business conference or seminar, and so on. It's important to note that there are different lecturing styles. The first is reading style. This style involves the speaker reading from a script or speaking as though he or she is reading from a script. Next, we have conversational style. In this style, the lecturer encourages the students to contribute during the lecture. Lastly, we have the presentation style, which involves the use of some sort of projection with the aid of presentation tools. Having known the different lecturing styles, let's take a look at some tips that would help us to listen effectively to lectures. It's important that when you are in a lecture hall or a classroom, that you get rid of any form of distraction. You must be present both in body and mind. This means that we must be physically present during the section, and also we must pay close attention to what the speaker is saying. Also, it is important that we listen for the introductory and concluding remarks of the speaker. It is believed that in the introductory remark, we have the overview of the main point or theme of the speaker, while in the concluding remark, we have the summary of everything that the speaker has said before. Moving on, it is important to pay attention to what is being said. Concentrate on the content and not the way the content is being delivered. Now, take aside any form of sentiment, whether you like the lecturer or speaker or not. That shouldn't be the problem. You should concentrate on what is being said by the speaker. Next, we have to listen for the main points or ideas of the lecture. How can we do that? We must look out for the key words or key points used by the speaker. During a lecture or a speech, the lecturer or speaker makes use of some keywords or signposts that indicate that they are about to say something important. Now, let's take a look at some of these words or phrases. We have first, in addition, my next point is, finally, and so on. Another tip for listening to lectures is listening for repetition. Now, most times when a lecturer is talking about something very important, he ends up mentioning that word or concept more than once. Now, when you hear such things, take note of them. And lastly, we should listen for the stress and voice modulation used by the speaker. When we say stress, we're talking about the emphasis placed on words. And also when we say voice modulation, we're talking about the pace of the speaker, the tone and the pitch of the speaker's voice. Having said all this, let's now go into the next concept, which is note-taking. What is note-taking? This is the process of recording or writing down important information, either from what we hear or what we see. Now, in this case, it is about what we hear. Notes can be drawn from lectures, discussions, sermons, seminars, and so on. Now, there are different styles of taking notes, but I will just give us few tips on how to take effective notes. First, do not write everything said by the speaker in order not to lose the main point of the message. Make sure your note is short and straight to the point. Next, take note of the repeated points made by the speaker and also examples made by the speaker. Going on, it's important to make use of symbols, abbreviations, or initials. This makes us write faster and catch up the pace of the speaker. First, we have etc., which means etc. Next, we have ampersand, which is and. Moving on, we have not equal to. Also, we have eg, which stands for exempli gratia. Also, we have WHO, which is the initial for World Health Organization. And lastly, we have an arrow pointing to the right-hand side, which can mean gives, causes, or leads to. Another tip on note-taking is the use of concept maps or diagrams. This is a typical example of a concept map, talking about the content of a good note. You see how it is beautifully drawn. Another tip on note-taking is the use of headings, subheadings, and numbering. This will help us distinguish between major points and minor points, and it will also make your notes very organized. Next, it is important to highlight the main concepts and ideas said by the speaker. You can underline, circle, or star the main ideas and concepts. This will also make you differentiate one concept from another. Next, we must take notes in our own words. But if we must quote what the speaker is saying, we must write accurately what we have heard. Now, lastly, it is important to go over our notes to make corrections for spellings, errors, and so on. Having said all these, we have come to the end of today's class. But before we go, let's take a quick summary of all we've learned so far. First, we've learned that a lecture is an oral presentation of a particular subject to a class or audience. Also, some tips on listening to lectures are paying attention to content, listen to identify the main points of the lecture by listening for the keywords and relevant illustrations used by the speaker. Moving on, we learned that note-taking is a process of writing down or recording key information. And lastly, for this lesson, we learned that in order to be efficient in your note-taking, there are some tips that can help. They include: do not write everything said by the speaker. And lastly, use symbols, initials, and abbreviations when taking notes. It's question time. Question 1. How can we identify the main points in a lecture? Option A. Listen for the use of symbols and initials. Option B. Listen for the mistakes made by the speaker. Option C. Listen for the keywords used by the speaker. Or option D. Listen for the lecturing style of the lecturer. And the correct answer is option C. We can identify the main points in a lecture by listening for the keywords used by the speaker. Question 2. Which of the following is a tip on note-taking? Option A. Do not write down everything said by the speaker. Option B. Write as slow as possible to avoid mistakes. Option C. Every word should be written in full. Or option D. Make sure to write in detail. The correct answer is option A. Do not write down everything said by the speaker. I'm sure you've enjoyed this class so far. This is where we draw the curtain for today's class. Until we meet again in our next class, see you and bye.